and we're going to deep dive into consent and connected TV. Now, I know many of you will have questions as to how you balance the opportunity of connected TV with how to be responsible in the world of connected TV, and I'm sure this panel will aim to explore this and give you some options for that. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Paul Gubbins, who is the VP of Connected TV Strategy at Publica, who's going to lead the session. Once again, don't forget, if you have any questions for the panelists, you can add them to the Q&A box that's at the bottom of the screen. But Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Ryan. As you said, my name is Paul Gubbins. I work for a global CTV ad server called Publica. And the discussion today is really focused on how consent works in CTV advertising, what that process looks like for the consumer, but also why it's increasingly important for programmatic advertisers trying to target streaming audiences in AVOD and fast environments. So to kick us off, I'm going to ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves. Josephine, if we could start with yourself, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Josie. I'm the Client Services Director from SourcePoint for the UK and Ireland.
Christian?
All right, I'll go next. I'm Christian. I'm our Global Head of Solutions for Addressability at LiveRamp.
Excellent. And Bally?
Hi, I'm a Senior Solution Consultant here at OneTrust.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Right, the first question that I have, the browsing experience is a lot different, right, on connected televisions, different from mobile devices, laptops, tablets. How does the concept of notice in choice and consent actually work? I mean, what does that look like for the TV viewer? Who wants to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, I can probably add some light to that experience. And I guess it's kind of taking a step back and looking at what does that experience look like today across those other touch points, because it's going to be a similar experience, whether it's web, whether it's mobile, or whether it's digital TV or CTV. We're always being presented with a banner and a preference center, all kind of highlighting to us as consumers what it is that organization is looking to do with your data, with the different tracking technologies. And really, it doesn't change on CTV. As it states by law or the regulation, you have to have that banner, you have to have that preference center, but it's having the flexibility of what that user journey should really look like. So whether it's using a QR code to navigate to a web page to then provide consent, whether it's using the digital TV experiences, or whether it's even having web views within the CTV as well to open up, navigate to the privacy notice or whatever it is, that user journey needs to be flexible enough to, one, accommodate what it is that you're trying to show, but two, you're also being compliant with the regulation as well. But ultimately, and I guess the point I'm trying to make is across those different digital touch points, we need to be able to honor the consent that the user's providing. Because if I move from mobile to CTV, as an example, I don't want to be kept being shown these banners or these preference centers. And it's being able to leverage that consent that you already have to say, oh, actually, we recognize this user. You were just on mobile. We know who you are. We don't need to surface that banner again because we know you're going to continue a journey on the CTV side of things.
Okay, perfect. And that's a great, I guess, overview there, Bally. So appreciate that. And when it comes to best practices, are we at the point now where collectively CMP vendors can educate publishers on some of the best practices when you've got TV manufacturers and streaming publishers thinking about what CMP adoption should look like? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer to that. I think the main challenge that we as CMPs and also publishers are facing at the moment is that there's such an incredibly diverse range of CTV platforms that we have to implement on. So not only do you have the different platforms, you've got all of the different versions and the different device sizes, plus you also have to manage messages like so that they interact with remotes, which is totally different to a touchscreen or a mouse. Yeah. So there's a lot of challenges in the market. So there are best practices in terms of designing the message by making it simple and clear and easy to navigate, as well as making them responsive as well. But it's still quite a complex sort of world to be in terms of designing and then providing a CMP to the users that's seamless across all of the different platforms and environments.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, Anne. And then, Christian, I know you and I have discussed this before, but from your point of view, what are some of the best approaches to actually extracting consent from streaming audiences? What would you recommend to a publisher, again, sat around a ball table trying to figure out how do they deliver a seamless experience to their TV viewer and make sure that they can extract consent in a privacy compliant way so that then can inform their targeted advertising strategy?
Sure. So I think here, I mean, really what you have to look at is like, what would you as a consumer want, right? Yeah. And I think there it's also about kind of being flexible, not necessarily like pigeonholing them to, they have to use the remote, looking at the TV and like filling everything out. I think, when you sign up for your TV, if you do want to use the remote, cool, you can do that. If you want to, open the app, scan a QR code, or even just like link your two accounts between your TV and your mobile and consent in the phone and have that kind of be permeate across all the devices, that should be an option as well. So I think it's really down to kind of, how do we make this as easy for the ultimate consumer as we can?
Yeah.
And then, just making sure that can be used across, any touch points you have with that client, be that CTV or something else. I mean, most providers will have more than just a CTV environment.
Yeah.
So that interoperability is key.
Okay, perfect. And Bally, something else that you and I have discussed previously, that concept of A/B testing. Are publishers still in that kind of early stage of figuring out the best way to communicate notice and choice to their TV viewers?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you think the consent that you're capturing of the other touch points is not going to be the same as you do from the CTV side of things. Yeah. And the look and feel, the way you're capturing that consent is going to change because the user experience and the overall experience from a digital TV point of view is so different. And like it's been mentioned, whether that's opening that experience up in app, whether it's in TV, ultimately the key thing here is being transparent, because it's still a micro experience that you're offering to that end user, but that end user still needs to know what it is that you're looking to capture, and more importantly, how it's going to benefit them as they continue that journey through with you.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. And look, you're all TCF compliant, transparency and consent framework from the IAB. Why is that so important at the moment for CMPs to follow that particular framework? Who wants to kick us off? Josie, I know you and I discussed actually last week the importance of TCF. Be great to hear your school of thought around this.
Yeah, sure. So I think the TCF allows for a really nice standardized format across all of the different platforms. So our users are used to those types of messages on web, on app, and if we can keep that same clear, similar message on TV, then it's a sort of a familiarity to those users and also the technology providers, because if you have that consent string, which you can share across sort of the logged in user experience, then it just makes that whole process a lot more seamless. I think for us as a CMP, we wanted to be able to provide our clients with that opportunity and also provide them with the tools to be able to sort of have durable consent across all of the different platforms.
Yeah, okay. And you touched upon their different platforms, right? CTV is very fragmented. A lot of the operating systems that exist now within the OEMs, TV manufacturers, are different from the operating systems that currently power the mobile and desktop ecosystem. Christian, you and I have been back and forth on the topic of interoperability before. Be interested to hear your thoughts around how TCF makes that a little bit easier for those on both the buy and sell sides when it comes to the extraction of privacy in CTV.
Yeah, so I think that the main word there is just interoperability, right? Like the fact that you can, like the fact that there is a standardized framework, it contains like every relevant player in our space, and it's a language that everybody can speak, whether you're an advertiser or a publisher. That kind of standardization means that the different kind of devices and different operating systems start to matter slightly less, right? Like as long as we can get to the same goal of creating the same kind of consent string, whether you do that by an API server side or whether you do it client side, like that doesn't really matter as much. And I think that's why the TCF is so powerful, because it is standardized, everybody knows it. And it can be used effectively in any environment. I mean, the previous session, we just heard how this like new SDK is coming out from the IAB. That's just an example of like adding yet more places where that can be created. And that's the other thing also is that it's not based on any device specific storage or anything like that. That I think is also really important, that the actual TCF string, it doesn't matter where you store it, right? It's compatible with any device, and technically speaking, that makes it a lot easier to achieve that interoperability.
Okay, cool. And then, so how would that work, Christian? Right? If we look at desktop and the mobile space, those environments are facing identity headwinds at the moment. Browsers are making the portability of data very difficult. Device IDs are becoming harder to extract. What does that then mean for CTV environments? Who becomes the end user agent? Is it the same kind of direction of journey that televisions are going to follow, or is the streaming ecosystem predominantly operating independently of the ID headwinds faced by digital and mobile at the moment?
No, I think that what we'll see is definitely CTV going in sort of the similar direction. I mean, if we look at kind of why the third-party cookie is going away, it's really because of two things. Number one, it's not transparent, it's confusing to people. Most people don't really understand the concept of a third-party cookie. The second thing was that it wasn't inoperable, right? Like when we used the third-party cookie, we had to translate between a DMP and a DSP, and then between the DSP and the SSP, and so on and so forth, which made for an extremely inefficient work stream, right? So I think what we'll see is that those two reasons, wherever they can be applied to similar IDs, those IDs are going to start to kind of face similar demises, frankly, as the third-party cookie did. And I think what we'll see is probably a move much more towards, actually better kind of customer relationships where the customer is sharing, actually authenticating, whether that's email addresses or whatever, but a more kind of customer-centric ID rather than a device-specific ID is, I think, the direction we'll see.
Okay. And when it comes to CTV publishers versus display publishers and mobile apps, do you think that AVOD and fast streaming services are much better placed because in theory, they've got a lot more data, first-party data from their logged-in users when it comes to, educating their viewers around what consent means and how consent can be extracted in a privacy-compliant way? Do we think, TV publishers are better placed, again, because of their breadth of first-party data?
Yeah, I would absolutely say so. I think that, as I kind of mentioned before, like the direction that the industry seems to be heading, and especially if we look at mobile, which is probably the most similar environment to CTV, like login and authenticated data and first-party data it's been huge for a long time.
Yeah.
So I think that CTV providers definitely are at an advantage there. They've built up those sort of first-party data sets for a longer time. And I think really where the CTV space is still, somewhat lacking compared to the others is the technology behind it, the interoperability to actually use that data and just make that data work for the publishers out there.
Yeah, fair enough. And Josie, from your side, do you find that there's an opportunity now to be better educating those on the CTV sell side when it comes to what they can be doing around CMP adoption, again, best practices when communicating to their TV viewers? Because I'm assuming, right, that to many in the AVOD and FAST space, the concept of a CMP is still pretty new. As Christian's just alluded to, they don't face the same identity headwinds as mobile and display publishers. But dependent on where those streaming services operate, be it here in Europe or in the US, they still have to adhere to the same privacy laws and privacy legislation. So it'd be interesting to hear about how, you're currently educating those on the streaming sell side when it comes to CMP adoption.
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of publishers just aren't quite aware of the opportunity that they do have. A lot of them are actually building up their identification solutions at the moment, and the ability to then import that into CTV is a huge opportunity for them. So I think once they start properly going into all of the different platforms and understanding where their audiences are and what kind of impact they could have with a consented experience, it's going to be a huge learning opportunity, and a great new additional revenue stream as well.
Yeah, agreed. This is a slight curveball question, but how does the concept of a television, right? It's a shared device, and in CTV circles, we talk a lot about targeting the household rather than the individual. Programmatic, for the last 10 or 15 years has been very much impression led. It's targeting the right user on the right mobile, within the right app, on the right desktop. But when it comes to addressable TV advertising, the market narrative at the moment seems to be very much around household level targeting. So how does that work when you think about the theory of consent? Is it consent at the household, or is it consent at the individual viewer level? Who's got an opinion on that?
I mean, I think that's the question. That is the unique challenge that we as an industry are going to have to probably work together to solve.
Yeah.
Because not only do we have to, have a compliant message for the regulations, we also have to consider the different age groups of those people within the household. Yeah. So obviously in the UK, we have the age appropriate design code. And that means that any content provider that could be accessed by children under the age of 18, there has to be some kind of set process for identifying and then collecting the right consent from those users. So publishers and platforms will have to design a process for identifying the age of those users, showing them different messages, collecting or not collecting the right consent.
Recording stopped.
And then applying restrictions based on this information. So it's going to be quite a complex journey. And I think some publishers and other platforms are going to be able to use what they've learned over web and app to be able to build these. But there's no clear answer yet how you can sort of target the right people with the right information in those households.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tracy. That's really interesting context. Bally or Christian, anything else to add on that point from your sides?
Yeah, I think this is where we're starting to see the shift in profiles.
Recording in progress.
As well. So when we sign up to a streaming service, we get asked a number of different questions, which are then all targeted to what content we can see, whether it's children content or whether it's more appropriate content based on what we're as adults are interested in. So by collecting that data, is essentially first party data that we're collecting directly from those forms, from that digital touch point, to then again decide what level of consent we're providing. Is it for a child? Is it for us as consumers? And then it's down to the publishers or whoever it is to then take over and start personalizing that user's journey, essentially.
Yeah, and for any publisher listening, right, it's not just important that they adopt a CMP to comply with local privacy regulations, but increasingly as more advertising dollars are transacted in a programmatic way, it's my understanding that those programmatic platforms like demand side platforms are increasingly going to expect that privacy is passed in a TCF compliant way. So those big DSPs know that the audience they're targeting on a particular publisher's streaming app is compliant with the TCF. So would you all agree that it's important to adopt a CMP if a publisher wants to attract more programmatic demand going into next year from a CTV point of view?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we can see the massive opportunity that we have with CTV. I think there was a stat put out by LG yesterday that 94% of UK households have a connected TV at the moment, which means the opportunity is just huge. So if you can get that consented experience through, then you've got the right targeted advertising to the right people. So yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. And again, if you're a publisher today thinking about exploring conversations with CMP vendors, what sorts of things should be front of mind for a publisher? What should they be asking when they're having these exploratory conversations? Christian, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts around that one, buddy.
Sure. Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's definitely the interoperability, like making sure that whatever CMP you go with, they have a kind of toolbox that allows for generating the consents, in any environment that they run in, and potentially that they have technology to kind of have that consent permeate across devices as well, like making again the customer journey as easy as possible. Like I think Bally, you said in the beginning, like the last thing you want is to have a completely different looking CMP on every single device, even though you're interacting with the same publisher. So I think the product suite that the CMP offers is key there.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And Bally, to that earlier topic that we discussed about having a singular approach to consent extraction, is that somewhere? Is that are we there yet as an industry, or as a publisher, are you still having different instances of CMP? So one for your desktop traffic, one for mobile traffic, one for CTV. What does that look like in your experience?
No, I think we're pretty much there in terms of offering that unified user experience across those different touch points. I guess it's then the second piece of the puzzle is, what does that user journey then start to look like? Because then we need to take into account those profiles that we spoke about earlier, all that first party data that we're collecting, and then what the journey onward after consent should really look like.
Okay, and do you think this is something that advertisers should be asking of their publishers as well, or is kind of CMP adoption within CTV at the moment still very much being driven by the sell side? Has anyone got a point of view on that one? No, I guess that's something we're all grappling with at the moment, right? As more ad dollars flow into addressable television, again, I guess the onus is probably on the DSPs to educate those on the buyer side around what targeting in a privacy compliant way looks like. And that's why lots of these big streaming services are currently on that journey today, having conversations with TCF registered CMPs like yourselves to figure out what they should be doing, how do they adopt it, how seamless is it, what does it mean to their programmatic yield if they're passing bid requests via SSPs in a privacy compliant way. I think we've pretty much covered most of the questions. That's been really interesting. I know we're still at the very early stage of this journey for many on the sell side. But there's now increasingly more CMPs registered with the TCF than ever before. We've discussed the increasing amount of ad dollars flowing into addressable television. We know that the majority of those are probably going to be transacted in a programmatic way. We know that DSPs are increasingly looking for privacy compliant impressions. So anything that big streaming publishers can do, be it AVOD or FAST services, or those big TV manufacturers, to make sure that they're adhering to the TCF, I think will only enable them to capture even more advertising budgets next year. If we got time, we might try and answer one or two audience questions if there are any, but I don't think we have any at the moment, unless I'm wrong. If you do have any, please feel free to drop me an email or tweet, and I can try and address those with the panelists when this particular conversation ends. But I think we're probably at time. So I would say a big thank you to all of my panelists today, and thank you for everybody watching. Again, if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to the IEB Tech Lab, myself, or any of the panelists, and we'll try and answer where we can. Thank you very much.